You are listening to The Tatiana Show. This show may contain adult content, language, and humor and is intended for mature audiences. If that's not you, please stop listening. Nothing you hear on The Tatiana Show is intended as financial advice, legal advice, or really anything other than entertainment. Take everything you hear with a grain of salt. Oh, and if you're listening to us on an affiliate network, the ideas and views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the network that you're listening on or of any sponsors or any affiliate products you may hear about on this show. Now that that's squared away, let's start the show. Hey there, it's time for the show, The Tatiana Show, where you make friends and talk life and crypto. This episode of The Tatiana Show is brought to you by Vaultoro. Vaultoro is a gold hedging solution for the crypto community. One of the challenges of investing in cryptocurrencies is dealing with volatility. Keeping a diversified portfolio is a key to healthy returns. I keep about 10% of my crypto assets in gold using Vaultoro. Vaultoro allows me to open a gold wallet in seconds where I can easily trade with cryptos and gold. What I like about using Vaultoro instead of Tether is that the gold in my Vaultoro wallet is insured, audited, vaulted in Switzerland, and unlike fiat money, gold has increased in value for the last 20 years. Visit vaultoro.gold/Tatiana today and get zero trading fees for the first 3 months. That is vault, like a gold vault, and oro, which is Spanish for gold. Vaultoro, ole! Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Tatiana Show. This is a special episode brought to you by Vaultoro. Josh is going to lead this episode today because we're actually bringing in a colleague of his from Vaultoro named Gabriel, who I've gotten to know as well, and he's actually from Venezuela. For people who have listened to the Tatiana Show before, you know that we talk a lot about the impact that crypto can have. But what we're hoping today is to get basically a real world perspective from somebody who, comes from there and can tell us what that kind of impact is, not only from an economic standpoint, but, on the actual people themselves. So I'm really excited to be doing this and I'm happy to have Josh take the lead. I'm actually broadcasting to you from San Francisco. There's the Bitcoin 2019 conference going on. There's a ton of people coming in. So we're going to be putting this out a little bit later today. And if you guys want to get some updates, go to my social media accounts. I'm going to try doing a Periscope from the conference. I'm going to be doing a performance, hanging out with some people. So take a listen for that. But let's get started. So Josh, thanks so much for joining me today. I mean, you're usually joining me, but it's nice to see you.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. And I'm really excited to have Gabriel, our CMO at Vaultoro, here on the show.
Excellent. Hey, Gabriel.
Hi, Tatiana. Thank you for having me.
Very excited to have you on. We always talk about Venezuela, and here we have somebody who can tell us about it firsthand. So I'm excited to hear your story and also share it with our listeners.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to share my story too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a funny thing, actually. In crypto, we constantly hear about Venezuela, and there are so many countries that have gone through hyperinflation. In fact, most countries have. In fact, probably all countries have. But it's the only country that's right now in a time where people have kind of forgotten what hyperinflation looks like, apart from in certain countries in Africa, namely Zimbabwe recently did. But Venezuela, for me, is different because it's very advanced. For me, it's not a developing country. It's already a very sophisticated country, wide use of internet, wide use of phones, very knowledgeable, intelligent people, learned people, that for me, it kind of feels like, whoa, they're going through this? It sort of hits home a lot stronger.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I'm pretty much tired, I would say, or angry almost to see Venezuela's situation being used as clickbait for media. And to see how the Venezuelans are seen as victims pretty much of whatever ideology you happen to disagree with, namely American imperialism, socialism, or communism. And in a way, I'm also tired to see Venezuela being used sort of like as the poster child of cryptocurrencies, because the problem goes beyond also economy. Hyperinflation is one of the problems that we have as people and as a country, but it goes way deeper. It goes to social problems that we have at many levels. It's one of the most dangerous countries in the world, politically extremely unstable. And on top of that, we have a pretty shitty economy.
Yeah, so let's back it up a bit and talk about, how long you spent there, what sort of contact you've got to Venezuela, because this is, I think you guys left a while ago because you could already see there was turmoil coming, right?
Yeah. Funny enough, I'll say my family raised me in a way that I was able to be extremely flexible when it comes to my culture, and adaptable to every sort of situation. That was pretty much a blessing. Given the situation in Venezuela, migration is not for everyone. Also, when you're sort of forced to emigrate, it makes it even harder. So my story is sort of that I lived the first 18 years of my life in Venezuela, and then I've moved to Spain. Also extremely lucky to hold 2 passports. I have a EU passport, Spanish passport because of my mom's side, and a Venezuelan passport. So that allows me to freely work and do whatever I want in the EU. That's a very small percentage of people that enjoy that. Yeah, and for the rest, I'm now 32 years old, and I live now 12 years in Europe, and it's mainly Spain and Germany. My connection to Venezuela, besides the obvious cultural connection that I still hold, is that most of my family is there. My parents actually left about 4 or 5 years ago to Florida, where they currently reside, but my grandma is still living there. The 2 sisters of my mom, they still live there. Most of my cousins still live there. The friends that I grew up with, went to high school with, they still live there. And many have migrated to maybe 30% of the people I grew up with are out of the country currently.
What was it like growing up in a country that was that had seen quite a bit of turmoil with Chavez, and then having an economic philosophy that's very different from the neighbor up north, namely America? Was there, I mean, as a teenager, was there much difference? Could you see something? Because I talked to my father, who grew up in East Berlin, and of course, if you were political, you could see the difference. But if you were just someone that was, living and a young guy, you didn't really notice it that much. How would you see it? How did you see it?
You started to see the changes, I guess, in early 2000s. So you have to think that the Chavez government was elected in 1999. So I was 12 years old when that happened. I was never really able to vote against the Chavez government, or currently the Maduro government. So once they took over, they kept winning every single election and gaining unlimited power in every level. Growing up in Venezuela was paradise. Before, in the 80s especially, the economy of Venezuela was booming. So my parents, although they were middle class, they did pretty well for themselves. So we own our own property, where more than one property actually. And my parents they thought they were pretty much settled for retirement, because they worked pretty hard and they deserved every bit of what they did. And so growing up as a kid, we had our ups and downs, but overall was a very good life. I think that the effects of the new economic policies that were implemented, especially in the Chavez government, were seen in the currency control, which is still available in the country, still exists in the country, the currency control. So that means basically that every person has some limits to what currencies they can acquire and how much of foreign currencies they can acquire. So the way it works is that you have a yearly quota. So if I wanted to travel abroad, I don't remember the amount at the time, but I don't know, I had $5,000 that I was able to purchase, and that was it. So if I bought with Bolivar's local currency $5,000 to travel, that's all I could have bought during a year in dollars or euros for that matter. Then you had also like an internet quota. So you had your 5K, let's say, to travel, but you had on top of that another 2,500 to spend on Amazon or online purchases. And that was sort of the beginning of the end towards like a freedom of economy and capitalism as we know it, where you're able to buy any currency when you want to draw or do whatever you want. Funny enough, right? That's why like currency controls are obvious, and repeatedly we've seen that they don't work. They don't work for like the population. They work pretty well for the government, where if you want control, right? But funny enough, what started happening is that if I didn't use my $5,000 quota of a year, what I would do is that I will sell it to you and then just get a percentage of, I don't know, 10%, 20% of that quota to allow you to use it. So instead of, of having 5K, you had 10K. That was obviously illegal. And the idea of controlling the currency was to basically control inflation. And that was only at the private level, but at the enterprise level was much worse. So these situations started happening during that currency control. Now it's harder to do, but especially I think that I have it written somewhere here. I think it was 2003 when the currency control was introduced. We had these quote unquote briefcase companies. So these were companies that were created out of thin air. They didn't hold assets, nor they had a business in itself, but they were registered as business. And what happened is that through this currency control, you could actually acquire sort of like a preference priced dollar that was cheaper to the one in the black market or the official one. And so you could just register a company, acquire a bunch of dollars, cheap dollars, and then you could either sell it again in the black market for a margin, or just basically run with whatever you had. So currency control just brought more corruption into our economy. And the problem with that is that it still is a sort of like a corruption mechanism. What has happened in the last 5 to 7 years is that circle has gotten smaller and smaller. So whereas before I was able to access some of those dollars, or I had the right to purchase X amount of dollars a year, today there's so much red tape around acquiring any sort of foreign currency that is virtually impossible to do so if you're in the country to acquire foreign currencies in a legal manner. So the only way that you're able to acquire foreign currency is through the black market.
I have a quick question. So if people are sitting around, they have to do a fair amount of math around this, right? I mean, they're calculating. It's not just something that, people are almost incentivized to sort of keep an eye on this thing. Would you say that people are more economically aware than in other places because they have to do all this, finagling?
Absolutely. I mean, that they're pretty good at math, if that's your question, and doing math in their head.
No, I'm just saying, like, conceptually, it's not something that people even think about in other places. I wonder if they would be more likely to take a look at what's going on the economic side. Like, would that make them more interested in that kind of theory? Because they're seeing it play out in real life. I mean, they have to know that something is wrong if you can't buy money and you have to buy it on the black market, and people do that relatively regularly, right? I
mean, I think that people that has been able to travel abroad and get to know a different system than the one they live in for most of their life, then that they aware of the implications and the differences, advantages and disadvantages. But there's also a big chunk of the population that gets used to it. So I think that's a big problem when it comes to the narrative of discussing the situation in Venezuela, that I feel many journalists use the sovereignty card to say people in Venezuela have the right to decide what government they want, and they want the government that currently rules, and therefore we should, do nothing about it. But I think that the problem is more complex, because it's a bit like saying that back in Hitler's regime, where most of Germans were fine and they agreed with the government in power, and they didn't think to themselves, or they wouldn't say to themselves that they're in some sort of totalitarian regime. It happens, it's sort of I would compare it to a similar situation in Venezuela in the sense that people has been already manipulated and they don't know another option. They don't know a different way of life. And you can compare it to the situation in Cuba where people, many, probably the majority, still would support the regime in power, but it's because they just don't know anything else.
Do you think that changes because of the internet, though? I mean, historically, people weren't able to share what was going on, news from other places with such accuracy like they have now. I wonder if that would have a bigger impact in terms of causing disruption, seeing it happen somewhere else, whereas before it wasn't so easily accessible, how they did it in the first place.
I think it does. I think you're absolutely right. And probably you can see it in the faces of the young protesters. So, I mean, the people that go out on the streets, especially the ones that go and would actually fight against police, against riot police or whatever force from the regime, they're teenagers, 20-something-year-old people that probably, understand that there is more of what they're getting at the moment. And I'm certain that internet, although it's pretty much controlled, not just because many websites are blocked in certain times, but with the electricity being the way it is and many other factors, I don't have the numbers, but I'm sure that the amount of people in percentage that is able to access internet in Venezuela, it cannot be much. It's definitely not the majority. Also, keep in mind that Caracas has the best infrastructure in the country, and is pretty shitty. And that's only 3 million people out of 35 million people that live in the rest of the country. And those outside the city, they're really screwed at every level. Those are the ones suffering the most when it comes to food and medicine shortages, when it comes to lack of electricity and obviously internet.
We were, for the listeners of the Tatiana show, we did a show with Scott Horton talking about Venezuela, and got you to have a listen to it before coming on. And his criticisms were that the United States empire is kind of promoting this idea that there's a large uprising in Venezuela, that there isn't that much food shortage, that people are sort of getting by. They're sort of making it work. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's not nice. There's a lot of suffering. This is kind of what my takeaway from what he was saying. How do you feel about that? Because, this guy is just a guy that's sitting in his lovely house, whatever, and he's a journalist. I'm really interested from people that actually live there, and to tell the audience what it's really like.
Yeah, I just want to say before I answer this is that I am also, a very privileged person sitting in comfortable Berlin, and I don't face day-to-day the problems that most Venezuelans do. At the same time, I do suffer from the relatives that I still have living there. We have to every single month send money to the relatives that we have there. We have to send every single month from Florida boxes of medicine and food to my grandma, because otherwise she wouldn't be able to survive. So I suffer with them. But what does allow me to be here is that I'm able to see things in perspective. What bothers me of the narrative of people like Scott Horton is that, for instance, he said that he talks about balance of power, and he being interested exclusively on the truth. But then he goes that Venezuela is not communism. And if Venezuela is not communism, then what is communism? I don't understand that. But if you keep listening, then you realize that he has a very clear agenda. So he said that he hates his government and he wants to destroy it. That's a bit anti-American to me, but he said it. So my primary objective is anti-imperialism. I'm anti-government in the general sense, which means I'm against the Venezuelan government as well as I'm against all governments. But funny enough, the way he's referring to Venezuela he's helping the government. Like he's helping the government, the regime, the Maduro regime by saying things are actually not that bad. So I understand that his main objective is just being anti-imperialism and anti the U.S. government. By doing so, he's pretty much aligning himself and helping the regime.
But I kind of felt like his take was that the U.S. government is using that to trumpet these drums of war out, to say that, look how bad everyone's suffering. We've got to go in there and the answer is war. And I feel like Scott's main objective is anti-war. I mean, his whole thing is anti-war. So
I see that perspective too. I don't think Scott was trying to minimize the suffering. In my opinion, I just think that because he sees so many bad things that the U.S. government does, specifically in terms of waging war, because I asked him about this later on in the episode, and he basically thinks that we're the biggest threat to the world. So I see what Gabriel is saying.
Yeah, totally.
But I don't think that Scott's trying to be insensitive to that. I don't know. We should let Scott talk about it.
Might be the case, but again, that's why I started with the statement that I'm a bit tired of see Venezuela being used to push other people's agenda. And I think that's the case right now. So what is happening right now is that because you're anti-Trump, for instance, then you have to be pro-Maduro. And that's pretty much the rhetoric that we have currently in the media, and especially with the left. And that's something that I understand. You can be pretty much anti-Trump and still try to understand why potentially, and I'm not saying that I'm pro that, but why potentially some sort of military intervention could help. That said, even that it's not that black and white. So what is currently happening is that you have to think there is about 4 million people, 4 million Venezuelan nationals living outside the country, many of which belong at some point to the military. So they were kicked out because they disagreed with the regime. One of the plans that is rumored or that could happen is that it's actually Venezuelan military which could intervene and take power. So it's not necessarily the Marine American soldiers who's gonna do that. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's not that black and white. It's not necessarily that what is in the table is that the U.S. is going to intervene or that's what they want. As a matter of fact, I feel that they're trying to avoid it at every cost. At the same time, even non-military actions such as the economic sanctions that the U.S. and other organizations have imposed into their government are seen as bad. So what's the play here? Then is the play just to do nothing? That's what I don't understand.
I think that's a really important and good question, because sometimes there's countries that are doing these mass, I don't know, genocides, whatever. They're just killing their people. They're doing bad things. And how are those people supposed to fight back? Is there a place for the U.S. to ever come in and do something positive with military intervention? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe we do have an obligation. The problem is how it ends up being implemented, right? And then it goes completely off the rails. So good intentions are not really what's important. Sorry about the racket. But anyway, so I don't know. I mean, what do you think, Josh? What do you think, Gabriel? Do you think that there ever is a time where you think the U.S. should go in, or any other military power for that matter?
Well, the thing is, just quickly, from my side, as I feel that the U.S. government never really intervenes in a country that has tulips as their main export. They never seem to want to intervene, even if they're really a terrible dictator there. It seems to be the intervention and the move is not only some sort of moral high ground that, that there's really a terrible dictator in place, but actually usually there's an economic incentive to take control of, some sort of resource.
I agree with that. And I think it's naive, actually, to think otherwise. It's often for-profit companies that actually manage to change the world, not NGOs. So many of the things that we do it for economic incentive. And that's there for a reason. So it is true. Probably if Venezuela wasn't rich, no one would give a shit. I agree with that statement. It happens that it is. Does it make it less bad? Does it justify it, that the fact that this is a rich country, that what is happening there doesn't require some sort of intervention for international countries and international community? I don't think so.
Yeah, true. But then you also get complexities in there where you have problem reaction solutions. And there's books like, I've forgotten who wrote it, but it was called The Economic Hitman, where you would get rich nations, in the past it was Britain, actually causing problems, economic problems, to then step in as the heroes and help the people. This is a constant sort of battle, and it's hard to see through that fog of, are they actually the saviors, or did they create the problem in the first place, or did they help create the problem? Obviously, they didn't create the problem in Venezuela. What I'm saying is maybe they let the problem happen for a long time, or helped the problem to grow. I don't know. I'm not saying that was the case, but I'm just saying a lot of the time that has been the case.
Yeah, you see that, like, I feel that underestimates the power of Venezuelan people, to be honest. Like, and this is what I mean. I don't want to be seen as a victim. And I think it's actually detrimental that we are pictured as victims, because we also do have responsibility for what's going on right now in our country. So one of the things that also Scott Horton mentioned is that Bush, apparently, like, he created the problem. He enabled Chavez to do everything that he did because of the price control at the OPEC. But in the first place, one of the problems that has Venezuela is that over 90% of our revenues come from oil. And since the 50s that Venezuela produced oil, we never care on diversifying. And that's our only industry. So sure, anything that happened to that revenue stream, or anyone that controls that revenue stream, controls the country. That would be way harder to do if you're Germany, wouldn't it? Like, control the automotive industry, pharmaceutical industry, banking industry, and so on and so forth will be way harder. So that happens a lot in oil-rich countries because they don't keep producing. They don't do anything else. So I think this idea of, like, maybe the US created this problem, it's, again, so limited and not sophisticated, because it's more complex than that. The scenario of Venezuela of the early 90s was perfect for a totalitarian regime to step in. There was probably no country on earth with better conditions. And one of them being the oil industry controls the country. It's the only thing we produce. If you own that, you can do anything you want. And that shows actually in the actions that they took after taking power. And that was, for instance, like nationalizing, taking ownership of pretty much every single industry. So, for instance, the Santander Group, second or third biggest bank in the world, that was acquired by the Venezuelan government in early 2000s, I believe. And that's something that, like, as Venezuelans, we couldn't even believe. It's like there's no way that the government is going to be able to acquire such a powerful institution. And yet they did.
When you say acquire, they just took it?
They bought it.
Nationalized it.
They bought it. So the board still made a bunch of money.
Yeah.
But by doing so, by making all the private banking system also institutional, they control everything, the whole economy. And it wasn't only banking. It was also then media. It was also then agriculture. It was also then the educational institutions. And that is, to me, And again, when I go back to like people being sort of like scared to say Venezuela is communism or dictatorship, like we need to start discussing about the Venezuela project with some sort of like from some sort of like rational basis. And that is currently not happening. And that is really frustrating, because if that's not dictatorship, then what is?
Yeah. No, that's spot on. I'd like to take it back to a little bit to cryptocurrency, because, you know, cryptos have gone around and they've said it since the beginning, when maybe 3 people knew about it, and they'd be headlines like cryptocurrency taking off in Venezuela, like really sort of leveraging the suffering that's happening there to promote the use cases of cryptocurrency. And look, I think it's absolutely a great use case. It's a country in deep financial crisis. People are suffering. What a fantastic way to go. You know what? There's the exit door. It's called a rare number. It's a thing that I can collect that is recognizable all over the world. I can send it without the Maduro government knowing anything about it, and yay. But in reality, it's really not taking off, because people are very suspicious of new forms of money, and so they should be, because there's so many scams. How do you feel? I guess the question is, how do you feel about the crypto industry kind of using the plight of Venezuela, and do you see it as a solution?
As a solution to what?
To freeing the people from the grip of using a forced monopoly on controlled money, to like a hyper competitive marketplace of currencies that we see in crypto?
I think it's still to be seen. I think that we will see the effects of cryptocurrency, or the potential of cryptocurrency in Venezuela, when the country starts actually a recovery process. Because right now, the biggest problem is not necessarily that we need a decentralized currency, but that industry just pretty much doesn't exist. So it doesn't matter what sort of like currency you hold if you cannot do business. It doesn't matter what currency you hold if you cannot buy goods. And this is what I mean. So what I can say is just the stories that I know from relatives and friends that use cryptocurrency. So let's first clear out, Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency for that matter, it is not used by the mass population of Venezuela. Let's just debunk that. That's not the case. What has happened in Venezuela is that cryptocurrency has been a mechanism for creating additional revenues. So for instance, I have many relatives invested in mining, which by the way was illegal for quite a while, and many people was put into jail because of mining, because government also wanted to have control over that. So there's many young people and tech-savvy people that have gone into cryptocurrencies and then have been able to feed their families, leave their country, whatever, buy medicines, whatever, through mining. It's also important to understand that Venezuela has the cheapest electricity in the world, and that is because it's highly subventioned. And this has been happening way before the Chavez government and all of this happened. So since my parents know, they were paying ridiculous amounts of money. Like, when I mean ridiculous, I mean like $5, $10 a year for their electricity bill. So it's highly subventioned by the government. Subsidized, by the government. So electricity is subsidized by the government. And mining has been an alternative. And it's been also an alternative for people that is trying to hedge, of course, the Bolivar. So for me, one of the most interesting stories that I've heard of the cryptocurrency scene in Venezuela is someone actually trying to flee the country, right? So this person actually owns an apartment, and the apartment is worth $50,000. Usually, the first thing you would do is just basically sell it for dollars. Then you take physically the bills with you on that plane or through that border. The problem with the dollar is that, you know, it can be, if you take $50,000 over the border, they're probably going to be taken from you. So what people usually do is that they have some sort of like bank account in the US or in Panama, and the buyer will basically transfer the money to their account in the US. Well, that's been also a problem because many bank accounts where you cannot justify where the funds are coming from can be shut down. So Bitcoin has become an alternative. On top of that, what, for instance, this seller did, like he sold his apartment actually in Bitcoin, $50,000 worth in Bitcoin. He was traveling by car to Chile through the Colombian border first. He got obviously checked in the government, but because he sold in Bitcoin, no one fucking cares, right? So brilliant, right? So he can just go through, and once he's in Chile, he can basically cash out. Most importantly, what he did is also did 70% of what he hold, he put it into gold using Vaultoro
Right? Wow.
Yeah. So he was able to also hedge a bit the volatility of Bitcoin. Once he was there, he put it back to Bitcoin, and he was able to use it for, you know, paying the rent in his new place and buying food for his family, and so pretty much just settling in.
Amazing. I mean, these are the sorts of use cases where I do believe it's the case. And in one way, I do get a little bit annoyed with constantly people bringing up Venezuela for crypto. As you know, I've gotten close being a friend of yours and you know, learning more about the country. But I feel also that crypto has sort of shone a massive light on the plight of what's happening there. If it wasn't for cryptocurrency, even faking that people are actually using it in mass, we wouldn't constantly hear about it. Or even news articles talking about, hey, Bitcoin is the solution for that, for the Venezuelan people. I think without that, we wouldn't have really heard. Like, there are other countries going through crises who I don't even know what their names are because no one's talking about that. And yeah, I think that's one good thing about constantly people talking about Venezuela.
Big time. I think, again, I think that the moment that we can start rebuilding our country, it's going to be very interesting to see what sort of economical system we want to build. And probably a central bank and something controlled by the government is not going to be our first option. So I think the next generation is going to be very aware and tech savvy, ready for crypto.
Yeah, that's really quite amazing.
What do you think the reception of something like a Vaultoro Gold would be there? Do you think that would be something that people would be a little bit more likely to get interested in because gold is something that they're already familiar with? Like, in terms of a cryptocurrency, I mean, sure, there's Bitcoin and stuff, but do you think that, I don't know, I mean, what do you think something like that how would that do there?
I'm not sure. You know, like, we rely a lot on the dollar. Dollar, like, plays a big, we trust the dollar a lot, and it's embedded into our culture big time. So it's only when you start studying economics and stuff that you understand the value of gold. And I think now that you're hearing all these stories of like this gold being Venezuelan gold being held by the English central bank, I think, or I don't know. And then people start thinking, oh, wow, so our economy is also backed by gold. And then people start wondering, so where is this gold thing? And why is the governments own it? And why is the Venezuelan gold is whole in Switzerland? It's in Switzerland or in England or whatever. I think that gold, funny enough, is one of the main metals that are mined in Venezuela. Venezuela has a bunch of gold. Probably people at some point would understand that. And sometimes, like, for me, I guess for me, one of the question marks about gold is the storage part, because if our gold is stored in Venezuela and at some point whomever is holding power gets corrupt and sells the shit out of it, which is happening, by the way, most of the gold that is left in Venezuela has been currently been shipped to Turkey because the government doesn't have enough cash. In any case, so what do you do then? Because it's, again, the storage part is going to be controlled by someone. So it's just the storage part needs to be, owned by someone that you really trust. So I don't know. I wonder if, for instance, like Josh has this amazing idea of being able to tokenize pre-mined gold. So, and why not, right? Like if the resources are there underground, you can potentially calculate how much that is and maybe not even have the ecological impact of mining. I don't know. I love that idea of maybe one day a country backing their currency based on the resources they have underground without mining it or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the idea was that you have a DAO that holds the amount of money it would take to mine the stuff out of the ground. And if all the token holders, or 50% or something, vote on actually mining it, then it would happen. So that threat of it being able to be mined would peg it to the price of it being sort of above ground or maybe close to. And that would, it's an interesting idea that we've been throwing around here for a while. But I find that gold, in a way, is an interesting use case for crisis countries if they have people that are old enough to understand economic theory. Because in the 50s, it was quite normal to talk about, hey, should we go off the gold standard? Should we really do that? It was a normal thing to talk about around the dinner table in the States. And nowadays, a lot of kids, they don't even know what that is. You ask them where money comes from, and they're like, "Well, my boss gives it to me." It's like, no. Where does she get it from? It's like, well, she gets it from selling stuff. Like there's no fundamental understanding about currency or money, and so we'll wait and see. I think these sort of crisis countries that are unfortunately going through this, plus the invention of cryptocurrencies, is having this renaissance in interest and understanding of what money or where money comes from, or how is it in my pocket, and what story lies behind that. So I think that's the wonderful part that crypto has to play in this whole story of money of the world is, hey, let's educate the people again. And I think one thing you brought up earlier was that the government in Venezuela took over the education system, which actually is happening in capitalist countries all over the world. It's in most countries is that state education is the norm, and they set the curriculum. And in most countries, they never talk about actually what money is. I can put my conspiracy hat on and say, it's designed that way because they don't want you to know, because otherwise everyone would look at the bits of paper and these dead presidents' faces and think it's actually just useless paper, when we used to come from something that was hard to dig out of the ground. It's not, you can't just print it out of nowhere. It takes a lot of work, and you can't just print as much as you want and wage war on your own people. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I guess what's interesting is that this renaissance of education that Bitcoin and crypto, as well as the projects like Vaultoro, is doing is educating people.
I don't think it's very in fashion to talk about that stuff, but I like talking about it too. I don't know. I always felt like economics was going to be really boring. And then when I found out about it, I thought it was super interesting. So I don't know, go figure. So guys, we're coming up on the hour. I wanted to make sure that we covered everything, though. This has been such a great episode. Thank you so much, Gabriel, for being so candid and giving us this insight. But do you think that there's anything that we haven't touched on that maybe you guys wanted to talk about before we sign off for the day?
There was one thing that you asked me that I don't know if I actually answered it. And I think the question was along the lines of, so what can you do? So what do you do first as a citizen when something like this is happening in your country? Or does a country like the US, having the power that it has, have the obligation or responsibility to act upon a situation, the one, like the one that Venezuela is living on? And I recently host a little talk on that topic. I will say, it's like, I think I named it something like how to save your butt when you're living under a dictatorship. And the thing is that, like, I think we realize, like Venezuela, people see Venezuela sort of like as a primitive sort of thing, like maybe they see it, especially like if you live in West Europe or in the US, you're seeing it as like, there's no way that something like this could happen here. But I think Venezuela is probably the future. And I don't want to sound apocalyptic or anything, but I think it is important to be aware of that. And actually, this is something that maybe I actually agree with what's his name? Scott Horton, because like definitely like governments hold way too much power. And I think we are coming to that realization slowly. And anyways, to bring it back to my point of like, what is it that you can do, right? In Venezuela, when we started realizing that we started losing our freedom, and you start realizing that your standards of living, start to plump and go down, you go to democracy. You go to vote. You go to talk to your congresswoman or congressman. You go to international institutions such as the UN, and you ask for help. The problem is that when you're dealing with an authoritarian government, that doesn't work. They don't believe in democracy. So it doesn't matter if the UN, puts a sanction on them or say that you should stop doing this or that. They don't believe in democracy. So where in a country like Germany, if 1 million people will go out right now and demonstrate against Merkel, she would probably step down if, willingly. In Venezuela, this has happened several times where there's been protests, Pacific protests of more than 3 million people, and they just don't give a fuck. They don't believe in democracy. So that's sort of like rule out. So then you go to civil disobedience. So what does it mean? So you go out in the streets, or maybe you go on a general strike, right? And let's say, okay, we stop working, and probably the government will need to sit down, right? We are not producing. The problem is because the resources are coming again from like oil, for instance, only source of revenue. And I don't want to get much into it, but now because like also all industries destroyed. Drugs, it seems to be the main revenue of the Venezuelan government. But anyway, so strike doesn't work because they control the whole industry. So even if you don't go to work, it doesn't matter. They don't care about the production. They have other means of revenue. So they don't care about that either. You go out and demonstrate, but guess what? They have guns. They have like really big guns. It doesn't matter if you're a kid with Molotovs. They have an armor vehicle in front of you and they kill you, and they do. Right? So that's ruled out. Then, you try to sort of like reaching out to international press, and you make a big story about it. And international press, well, either they mess up the story like they're doing right now, and national press is pretty much controlled by the government. So that's also ruled out. So sort of like the last option that you have is to migrate, to leave the country. And that's why more than 4 million people have left. And I think that's very important to understand. And to understand that, for instance, people like me, like I left, again, like under privilege. I was able to still buy foreign currency. I didn't have some sort of like limitation when it comes to freedom of movement. By the way, the government also controls freedom of movement. We all have a passport, right? And that's controlled by the government. And right now, for instance, my dad, he's stuck in the US on a refugee status, but he doesn't have a passport because the Venezuelan government is not issuing any passports whatsoever. It doesn't matter how much money you pay, because at least before you could have one for $5,000. Nowadays you cannot. So he's stuck. So freedom of movement, which is like a human right, is also violated. And then it is still, to me, like a big question in my head, because I'm usually a sort of like lefty pacifist, right? But I do wonder about violence. I do wonder, like, when is military intervention required? What are the checkbox that we need to tick to say, yeah, this is now fine, morally fine? When? People is getting attacked every day there, either by the government or militia or just plain thugs. There's just no future there. So I don't understand, when are we morally okay to say we need to step it up, because the people that we're dealing with is not a democratic government. It's not people that is willing to talk. It's people that are going to take their gun out and shoot you in the face because they're prompt to violence. That's what they do. That's why they remain in power. They remain in power through violence. So that's just a big question for me, like, that I debate personally a lot. I don't know how to fight violence, like, with non-violence.
Yeah, I mean, fleeing is a good thing, but you need to not have embedded family to, make the call early enough while the crap hasn't hit the fan yet to be able to.
Who thinks that's going to happen? You know what I mean? You never think that's going to happen, and I don't know, it's not the most convenient thing to be prepared for. Yeah,
and I mean, you stated before that that Venezuela is the future. And then you just said then they have no future. So what do you think?
I don't know what I meant. What I meant with Venezuela is the future is that what is happening in Venezuela, I think it's going to keep happening to other countries.
Yes.
So I think it's what going to keep happening to countries where, like, we think everything is fine. Mm. And this is what I meant with, like, I agree with many things, like with some of the statement that Scott said. I think the government holds way too much power, and we don't realize. We don't realize until one day your passport expires, and guess what? There's no nation that will give you one. Even although we have a body like the UN, they're not authorized to give you a passport. Isn't that shitty? So now all of a sudden you don't have freedom of movement anymore.
Yeah, you're stuck.
You're stuck.
Yeah, no documentation. And then on top of that, there's also knock-on effects, like you can't get insurances and you can't get all sorts of things, bank accounts. And
all sorts of things. And in this situation that my dad is in, like, it is calculated that about 1 million Venezuelans are in the same situation. If they were lucky enough to be caught, in this situation out of the country, well, at least you're out. If you're inside, it's getting harder and harder and harder to leave the country. And for instance, like, that's also like people, I don't know, that people seen that, like, history repeats itself literally. And what I mean with that is, like, Cuba, they sort of, from a very top-down approach at some point, say, none of my citizens are able to leave this island. And they made it official. You're not allowed. If you do that, you're going to get caught, or you're going to get killed, or worse, right? Venezuela is doing that, but in a more sneaky way. How do they do that? Well, first, it's extremely hard to buy a fucking flight ticket, right? To leave out of the country. It's very few people who can afford that. Second, the passport control. So first it started that, you needed to wait maybe 6 months to get your passport. Then it started that you needed to pay $1,000 to get your passport. Up to $3,000 my parents paid to leave the country back in 2004 or 5, something like that. And now, not even that. So you have to be in a very, very, very close circle to the government right now to be able to hold a Venezuelan passport.
Yeah.
So officially, you're able to leave the country whenever you want. But how?
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of free-range chickens. There's free range, but they're all stuck in a little shed with one little door that's open, and a huge step, and they can't fly, they can't get over. So they're free, but they're not. They're trapped. And this is exactly right. You say that they're free by saying, anyone can get a passport. Oh, but by the way, a passport costs way beyond years and years of the average wage. Plus, you probably will get rejected because of some little detail.
The other thing that gets me really bothered, man, is like when you see, like these journalists or whatever, they go and stay 2 weeks in Caracas and they say, oh, but it seems fine. I saw some food in the shelves and stuff. And it's like, haven't you seen all those documentaries on Pyongyang in Korea? It's all set up. Like, you go there and it all seems fine. Like, you see even fat people in the streets. I mean, aren't we naive? Jesus Christ. You think that, like, going to Caracas for 2 weeks, you're going to get an accurate idea of, like, how things are? Fuck off.
Yeah.
Honestly.
So what would you recommend? They go out to the countryside?
Countryside is a good one. Go to the border, man. Go to speak the actually, like, not the 3 million people that live in Caracas that get along. Also, like, most of the government people live in, every people in the, their host power in the government lives in Caracas. They also want to live well, right? So go outside.
You can't trash their home.
Yeah. So go into the outskirts, go into the countryside, go to the border, and see how things are, and talk to the 4 million people that's out of the country.
Well, it's been absolute pleasure having you on the show. I will have to have you back on because I think it's a fascinating topic, and it's obviously very close to your heart, and it's wonderful to hear such a raw and a raw picture of what's happening there instead of just this sort of, I know, people pushing their agendas in terms of coins and all the stuff that we see in the crypto space. So
I appreciate it too. I also wanted to sort of like end as much as possible on a positive note, because like, even though obviously, again, like, this is me saying it from a very comfortable position, but I think that the Venezuelan people is learning so much from as a society, as a people, right? As Venezuelans, from what is going on, that I think we are going to come out on the other side so much smarter in every way. And I also think that, like, again, we're going to, like, there's so much, like, this million of Venezuelans are living out of the country, but we are still so identified with our roots and with our people that we start wondering, look, man, like, you know what? Like, we don't have to even be in Venezuela to be Venezuelans. And I think, like, you start, like, thinking of, like, this concept of, like, what a nationality is. And I think, again, that's what I'm saying, like, Venezuela is the future. Just like today, today I hold a Venezuelan passport and a Spanish passport. And guess what? I'm also, like, e-citizen from Estonia. You know what? And I think this is honestly the future. I think that nationalities are going to definitely cross borders, and it's going to be then way harder for corrupt people and mean people to control you.
very, very well said.
I want to see the future be bright and wonderful. I want to go to Venezuela and check it out maybe one day, and maybe things will be a little better. I've always actually wanted to go there. I've been to some places, but not there yet. So I would love to go sometime. Maybe we'll do a Vaultoro family trip. What do you think, guys?
Let's do it.
I like that idea. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. If you have any comments, please feel free to leave them. We're on all the social media places. Vaultoro, do you guys want to give your links real quick?
Yeah, if you go to vaultoro.com, that's vault as in a gold vault, VAULT, and oro, which is Spanish for gold, that's vaultoro.com. And you can trade Bitcoin for physical gold and trade its allocated gold and fully insured and fully audited. And then you can trade back to Bitcoin when you feel the time is right. And also, guys, to get this show out, make sure you like and share this show, because that really helps the Tatiana show out.
Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate your time today, Gabriel, and we'll see you next time. The Tatiana Show on Tuesdays and Proof of Love on Fridays. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
If you have a project that needs reliable cryptocurrency data, check out blocktap.io. Blocktap.io is a universal cryptocurrency API. You can get historical prices for Bitcoin and other digital assets that you can use to build charts and do market analysis. Blockchain data is also indexed so you can get transaction statistics, address balances, and more for Bitcoin and other networks. Blocktap.io is free for personal use, and you don't even need to create an account to access the API. To get started, try some of the example queries on the homepage at blocktap.io. Hey there, it's time for the show, the Tatiana Show. where you make friends and talk life and crypto. We gotta think and reflect and use lots of intellect with our hearts when we work together. I know that it can be so hard out there, looking all around and saying that life ain't fair. So that is why we will fight and stay up late at night, listening to the Tatiana Show. What's the point of all this technology without a little love in our lives? Our hosts, Tatiana Moroz, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and Lauren Kasovitz, have come together to bring you Proof of Love. Go to proofoflovecast.com. Thank you for listening to The Tatiana Show. Please follow us on Twitter at Queen Tatiana or on Facebook and Instagram at Tatiana Moroz Music. More episodes can be found at thetatianashow.com, and make sure you leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends. The Tatiana Show has been brought to you by CryptoMediaHub.com, a boutique marketing and PR agency for Bitcoin and beyond.